Hello, my name is Cecilia from the NYDA team, and you are listening to the NYDA podcast. We conduct due diligence and monitoring of working conditions using worker engagement technologies. And on this third season of this podcast, we want to support procurement and sustainability professionals with powerful insights relating to human rights due diligence. What are the legal requirements when considered practically, and what would constitute good practice? We bring you some of the leading voices in this field to answer these important questions. Come and join us.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to those listening to this episode of the NYDA podcast. Welcome back. To those who've listened before, this series 3 of our podcast is focused predominantly on human rights due diligence and settings in which human rights due diligence is called for, as well as addressing legal requirements in particular jurisdictions. But enough of that. I'm excited to welcome Kenton Harmer from the Equitable Food Initiative today. Welcome, Kenton.
Thanks, Lee. Great to be back on this.
Brilliant. We've exploited Kenton's time and wisdom once before on the podcast, and I'm hoping this won't be the last time. It depends how well we behave on this one, I guess. But Kenton is managing director of the Equitable Food Initiative, and NYDA has been working with EFI for some years now on multiple projects. Actually, I think it would be helpful to hear more about a kind of brief intro about the EFI from Kenton himself, given that his depth of knowledge on EFI trumps mine. But we've really enjoyed becoming quite regular collaborators with the EFI and have pulled Kenton into this particular podcast because the topic of seasonal workers, specifically migrant seasonal workers, and the recruitment practices they're subjected to, has come up recently because of the UK situation with Nepali workers. And I think this is timely because there are lessons to be learned from across the Atlantic and elsewhere in the world. And we happen to be privy to the experience of the EFI through our collaborations with them. So that's why we're asking Kenton to contribute today. So Kenton, can you give us a quick intro into the EFI first, and then we'll dive into the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lee. So the Equitable Food Initiative, for the last 9 years, has been primarily a workforce development and certification program. So that means doing a lot of work in the fresh produce supply chain across the Americas, with a real view on how to adapt farm level cultures in order to promote worker management collaboration, in order to then go and solve some of the many issues that face agricultural employers and agricultural workforces over here. Recruitment fees, like we'll be talking about today, of course, is a huge one. But we're really proud of the impact we've been able to make through our certification program. We have somewhere around 60,000 workers on certified farms in 5 countries in the Americas right now. But we also realize some of the constraints of that type of work, that type of certification work, that kind of putting auditors on the ground, putting trainers on the ground, really taking a compliance view on how to address some of these issues. So while that work continues, and we're really pleased with the growth that's getting and the attention in the industry that's getting, we realized that to increase our impact, we had to be more expansive as an organization as well. So we have some interesting work going on right now around career ladders and upskilling for agriculture. So how do you take this unique, incredible set of skills that is required to harvest fruits and vegetables? How do we break them down? How do we recognize each element of the skills of a harvester, the skills of a of a planter, the skills of a packer, and then really honor the skills that the workforce does right now, but then make sure that each individual has credits for the skills that they've gained through this industry and has the opportunity to gain new skills. So we have this it's almost equivalent to electricians, where you have to work your way up, and you get more and more skills as you go, but you also get more and more compensation, and your workplace becomes you become more valuable to the workplace and to the industry. So we've got that interesting work of trying to set up a similar structure for agriculture. And as we go through this conversation, it'd be interesting to talk about how even skill building workers ends up lowering the risks to things like forced labor and recruitment fees and some of those things. And then another piece of work that we're concentrating a lot on right now, which has really been motivated a lot by our identification that we need to take on recruitment fees in a much bigger industry-wide way than we can through a certification program. It involves building a technology platform that can build a credible and continuous improvement pathway for 100% of a global supply chain, so that we can really give people visibility into supply chains, but visibility into a way of who understands the issues and who's doing the work, and how are we ultimately going to help workers, and how do we do that through an online software platform. So really kind of new and big thinking for us, a whole different theory of change on how to take this stuff on. So those three pillars, Lee, those are kind of the core of what EFI is doing in the world right now, and how we're trying to really run towards some of these really difficult issues.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kenton. That was comprehensive. Now, to our topic, as mentioned earlier, there have been recent revelations about recruitment fees imposed, recruitment fees, and also the burden of travel costs on migrant seasonal workers working on UK farms. So we'd love to discuss specifically the EFI's experience of contributing to identifying and addressing the challenge of recruitment fees and irresponsible recruitment practices affecting migrant farm workers in the US and Canada. Wanted to start by asking Kenton a little bit about the history of the problem, the kind of recruitment fee and indebtedness problem amongst migrant workers in the US.
Yeah, I think the history of recruitment fees is the history of the fresh produce industry over here. I think they've right from the very early days, it's been baked in, and it came along with this concept of workers are simply commodities. Workers are a set of hands, and there's any number of set of hands available to you as an employer as you need. And in fact, there's more than you need. There was an oversupply, and therefore it became a privilege. It's in some way an economic privilege, and that's completely the wrong word. But to get that sort of meaning is it opened up the door of exploitation of workers, and it made getting agricultural jobs competitive in a way where workers were being forced to pay to get a job, and then forced to pay to get to a job. That oversupply of labor is not present in the industry anymore. We're at a time in the Americas of a very pronounced labor shortage of agricultural workers, and yet, strangely, this problem still persists. Is even at a time when getting workers is difficult and complex and costly, we're still in a situation where many times workers are being asked to both pay for access to a job, and again, as you were mentioning, pay to get to a job. And I think the big change that's happened over here, because that doesn't make sense, right? We've got, you can understand in a competitive labor supply when the workers are sort of fighting for a job. We're in the opposite situation now, but this labor shortage has caused the rise of these intermediaries. So we've got, so the recruitment industry, the farm labor contracting industry has really took advantage of the tight labor market to become the answer for agricultural employers. And in doing so take the burden off an employer who's trying to grow fresh fruits and vegetables. I got you, pay me a bunch of money, and I'll have workers get to your farm gate, and then we're good. You know, it's a very attractive value proposition for the ultimate growers, for the ultimate employers, to outsource this. And in doing so, we see this proliferation of this new, and it's not a new industry, but certainly at this scale it is. And in that, we've got some good actors. We've got some folks that are doing it right. And we'll talk about how we identify who's doing it right, who's not. But we've also got a lot of new actors and bad actors in that field. And so the recruitment fee legacy has continued on, except now it doesn't tend to be the grower that's paying that's asking for the recruitment fee. It tends to be either the recruiter in the source community, or the farm labor contractor, or the bus driver, or some intermediary, some fixer at the for the embassy appointment. So there's all these steps that before the farm gate, and that's where we're seeing in the Americas right now, again, just a continuation of an endemic level of recruitment fees.
Fascinating that oversupply to undersupply of labor and the role of those intermediaries. It's fascinating to see how that industry, which of course profits from any kind of crisis, whether over or undersupply, has remained the kind of continuous thread and the continuous challenge in a way. But maybe no surprise. But wanted to ask in that context, and given that history and the norms that follow, I'm sure workers are kind of part of the challenge is workers take it for granted that they'll be subjected to certain fees and payables along the way. Wanted to ask in addressing that challenge and kind of encouraging responsible recruitment practices, what has worked?
I would change the verb tense of that and reframe it more along of like, here's what we're trying that we think is going to make a difference. But I think I don't think it's accurate for anybody in the Americas to be able to say we've fixed this problem or we even got our arms around it. I think we're continuously learning about the sophistication of recruitment fees, the breadth, where it's happening, how much they are happening at each side. So it's something that we're engaging with, daily to try and get better at it. But I certainly don't want to present that we've really unlocked the code here and gotten rid of recruitment fees in agriculture, because there is just a ton of work to do.
Sorry, what I meant by what's worked is, what has worked in trying to identify where the problem is concentrated and who's suffering the most from it, and B, what's worked in essentially, making some progress, if not, some progress where progress has been made sometimes, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and folks that listen to this podcast may know that Ann Wider and EFI did a really interesting study along this lines. 2 years ago, I think we issued the report to again, really just understand the problem from a worker's point of view. And that's not terribly revolutionary to think about, like, let's ask workers what their lived experiences have been. Let's ask workers, what they have experienced. What was really interesting about that report was the second part of it, where we said, okay, now that we understand your experiences better, here's some ideas around some programming that may take some of the risks that you've identified for us out. So in essence, we were able to come back to the workers a second time and then a third time and say, how would you design this recruitment pathway so that things like recruitment fees have less of an impact on you? And we were able to get some really interesting data through that study. And really, I think why that data was particularly valuable was not only just bringing them into the solution, not just the problem statement, but also the methodology we took on about meeting folks in their communities and asking them these questions in a very safe space and very trauma-informed way, and very ethically rigorous around how we engaged with workers. So it's not standing outside their farm gate, on their way home when the supervisor's in the parking lot. It's I think there's a lot of ways we can do this kind of data gathering, which ends up ultimately, if it doesn't benefit the workers, and it may actually be harmful to the workers. And what was interesting about the data set that we were able to collaboratively develop was just how rich it was because of the approach to the workers. So I think sort of this worker-centric idea to even defining the problem statement, which is going to be pretty dynamic and change very quickly over time as things like immigration law change, is going to be really key. So that's sort of on the problem identification side of things. Is our understanding of this problem has to come from workers, and our understanding of the solutions has to come from workers as well, not from not from us sitting around a conference room somewhere trying to guess at that. So we feel passionate about that part of like really bringing workers into this, rather than doing this for them or to them, but with them. And then some of the approaches that have come out of that, particularly with recruitment fees, and again, I just want to reiterate, is like this is still a real live issue. This is something that we will talk about all week this week with employers, with farm labor contractors, with retailers, with some civil society folks. Like this is a huge part of us trying to make agriculture, have the health of the industry match the health of the product. And where we think that we're going to be able to make the broadest impact, again, is going to be this technology play that I talked about previously, which is to get everybody in the supply chain involved at some level, while we also we're going to keep the other interventions where we can go very, very deep with employers that self-select into like the certification program. And if it's not EFI certification program, there's others on the market that they can do. And we can fix workplaces one at a time. But for the widespread nature of recruitment fees, we've got to be thinking about something that scales in a way that no certification program that we can imagine ever will.
Just wanted to add one comment to your reference to the ERA project that we worked on together previously, kind of tracking the experience of mostly Mexican farm workers in the US, onto US and Canadian farms and their experience of recruitment fees. What I found interesting about that project, and you touched on it, is the feedback loop and the fact that, what we noticed about that was so valuable about the project was the fact that workers are a source of solution rather than merely identifying a problem. And that actually the qualitative data collection that was front-loaded was we front-loaded, enabling workers to comment on ideal recruitment. What would ideal recruitment look like? And then the quantitative data collection via mobile was then asking about their lived experiences, for obvious reasons, because that was more anonymous and it wasn't face-to-face, etc. And we were very careful, as Kenton was pointing out. But what's interesting to look at it now, look back on it now, is now there are these human rights due diligence laws, sweeping quite quickly across Europe. And you see the term meaningful stakeholder engagement bandied about quite a lot, in the laws themselves, especially in the EU directive. But the parent of that discussion was actually the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights that talked about meaningful stakeholder engagement. But what was so lovely to witness and such a privilege to be part of is that in this program, workers. Irresponsible recruitment is in some settings organized crime, and in other settings much less organized and much more organic and worrying in terms of being very diffuse and complex. But workers are always closer to it than any institution will be. So workers are the experts in the landscape. So those are the stakeholders that we have to kind of prioritize in terms of engaging. And in that program, what was amazing to see is that workers could identify the nature of the problem, could identify the extent and nature of the problem, which dimensions were the most grueling and difficult, which weren't, in which circumstances they were exacerbated, but also then, essentially vote and evaluate the different suggestions for addressing different dimensions of the problem. And what we see now, and the way migration kind of patterns have changed so quickly during the COVID pandemic, and the way that brings a whole new set of challenges because it's a different landscape, different providers, different labor contractors. Again, workers are closest to it. Workers are the experts. Therefore, that meaningful stakeholder engagement, the entire feedback loop, not just pulling in data to measure the extent of the problem, but also feeding back to ask workers how they'd solve it, I think is a no-brainer. And it would be great to see that also happening in the UK. But anyway, so third question was, again, recognizing that we're not there, we haven't solved the problem, but in your experience, Kenton, what efforts and approaches, assumptions haven't worked when it comes to addressing irresponsible recruitment?
Yeah, haven't worked. I would say, and I'll be careful with this because it's a bit of a cell phone, but it's to that idea of in the EFI certification program, where we spend a huge amount of resources in identifying, mitigating, and remedying recruitment fees. On a micro level, we do okay. We get some stuff done. We can go to our farms and have a greater level of confidence that fewer workers are paying recruitment fees. But when you look at the percentage of our farms compared, if we're wildly successful in growing that program over the next 5 years, we are still only going to be a tiny, tiny sliver of the industry. So on a macro scale, I would say that doesn't work. That's not an intervention that works. It works really good for discrete workforces. It's not an industry solution. This idea of invest in being able to put humans into the situation with workers and with management and set up the culture and mechanisms needed for workers and management to solve recruitment fees for that particular context. I love it. We see great things in the very few places that we get to work. And so what's not working is the alternative to that. What's a scalable solution where we can actually engage the entire industry to bring them in? And it's never going to be at that depth. And so we're going to have to talk about the trade-offs that we get. Like when we go broad, we can't go deep. And so what does that mean? But yeah, sort of I'm over emphasizing your thing, but I would just say our inability as an industry to scale meaningful solutions is what's not working. One of the things that's not working in allowing us to really address this in a more concrete way.
Excellent, Kenton. Thank you. There are two issues that strike me about what you just said, about what hasn't worked and the need for a scalable solution. The one is, to what extent would a scalable solution require the retailers and businesses actively sourcing from the farms to collaborate?
Yeah, it is completely predicated on that kind of market signal. We're seeing really good progress in the U.S. in particular right now with the retailers who are starting to attach a market signal to the right things, and that makes this work. It doesn't make this work easier. It makes this work possible. If the value statement for an employer who's going to take this work on, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be confusing, and it's complex, and it's going to disrupt normal production, because we have to fundamentally change the relationship with how we see workers and where we place workers into an industry which has placed them the lowest tier, again, as commodities, to blow that up and rebuild it in a way where things like recruitment fees become less of less of the problem. There needs to be more than just sort of the moral journey and the counting on a few enlightened executives to really do the ethical thing. We just simply have to have a very clear market signal that says we are going to buy from the good people in our supply chain, and we're not going to buy from the bad people. And that's oversimplistic. That sort of sets up like there's a 0 and a 1, and there just isn't. So that market signal then has to get more complex than that, and it has to be around. And this is what EFI is really thinking is the future of this kind of work: is how do we provide a supply chain view that says these are the folks that understand the problem and are doing the work. And that's a very different statement than saying these are the folks that are showing you the results that you want to see, right? And that if we base the market signal purely on results, then underneath that we need a compliance system that says these are the verified results. We know these to be true, and so you can base these very important commercial decisions on these results. And I'm sort of here to say, we can't build that compliance system for 25,000 suppliers into the fresh produce supply chain in the US. And so there can't be an auditor on all of those 25,000 sites. And if there is, if somebody's sitting there and saying, well, maybe, then we can have the conversation about, well, how meaningful is that auditor to that? Like, what is that? Is that a 1 hour visit that says that the systemic work is getting done to solve for recruitment fees? So all of this comes together. We having rehashed the problem statement over and over again, Lee, around this, have said that maybe compliance is the problem here. Maybe it's this idea that we put so much focus on results, and that we have to then take what resources are available and put them all into trying to prove or disprove the results. And maybe there's a different way to use those resources, and it's taking those resources and building a continuous improvement pathway for 25,000 growers that is accompanied by, and right back to your original question, that is accompanied by a market signal from buyers that says, okay, we, through this ecosystem of continuous improvement that we're able to build, we can tell who is doing the work, who is engaging credibly, and who is realizing some successes because they're running towards the problem. And those are the folks that we would say the market needs to be rewarding. If we take a results standpoint, then we're going to get a lot of bad results in that. And if we take a zero tolerance sort of view of this, like, wow, recruitment fees are really bad. They're really bad for workers. They're really bad for industry. We can argue why they're bad for food safety, why they're bad for productivity. But we can find recruitment fees almost anywhere on any farm here. That's not a 100% statement, but it's that endemic that that if we just want to redline anywhere where we happen to find recruitment fees, we're not going to have a very robust supply chain very quickly. So shifting the mindset to say, let's put our resources into trusting that there is a huge core cohort of the growers, the part of the industry that's growing and harvesting this product that actually can do better, wants to do better, and will do better if we give them the right incentives, and if we give them the right technical knowledge, and if we give them a very clear and easy to use platform, pathway, whatever you want to call it, to do it. And so we're really counting on a new theory of change around recruitment fees, around forced labor, around worker safety, all of like the big ills that we can find in this industry, to say, let's build a space where people can enter and not be punished for entering, where people can do really credible self-assessments of where they're at. What are their management systems that they have related to reducing recruitment fees through all of the actors between the source community and their farm gate? And are those management systems strong enough? And are they effective? If they're not strong enough, let's give them information on how to strengthen them. So let's give them the chance to safely assess. Let's give them technical resources. Let's ask them to go and do the work, come back and rescore yourself. And then what we find is really interesting, and coincidentally enough has an Ann Wider tie-in, is let's also keep that worker-centric view and the value that workers can bring to even a self-assessment type continuous improvement process. And let's ask the workers about their experience of that management system to understand whether that management system has the opportunity to be even stronger or more effective, or to have reduced some of the externalities it might be having. So it's all kind of mushy. I think I'm not laying it out in a really straight line kind of way, but what we're advocating for recruitment fees, and again, so many of these other issues, is continuous improvement over compliance, scale, and worker engagement that then gives us a supply chain view where the market signal says, we aren't looking for perfection, we're looking for effort. And those are the folks that we are going to buy our product from going forward, and to encourage this big middle of the bell curve of the industry that wants to and can do better to keep shifting to the right and getting the management systems in place where so many of these issues can become much more manageable and much less risky to both the workers and the growers and the buyers of fresh produce.
Wow. That was actually far more clear than you think it was, Kenton. And the point you make about, away from compliance, away from perfect, towards the reality that it'll always be imperfect, recruitment fees will always be a possibility. focus on continuous improvement and reward continuous improvement and measure it is what we should be after. Sounds very, very logical to me. But what I wanted to just mention is it's an interesting evolution that you've gone through within EFI. Pivoting towards this method of using an online platform to reach scale and an online platform to enable anyone to start wherever they are and to get the support they need to improve their management systems and practices, and to be rewarded and recognized by the retailers on that same platform for making progress. That is in perfect sync with the fact that we've also seen a big change in laws, from forced labor kind of acts that created this Facebook effect where it was all about various kind of retailers and brands saying we've got it perfect, don't worry, it's sorted, to a different wave of legislation and requirements that now say, no, there's no such thing as getting it all sorted. Actually, this is going to be a continuous challenge. And that because of the rapidly changing nature of supply chains and because of migratory flows and because there'll always be a population of actors we don't know and will continue to be unknown and unknowable, the practices will creep in, but what we need to be doing is having a rigorous process to kind of check, engage, and drive continuous improvement, which is the due diligence laws. It's all about how you're doing it, not whether or not it's sorted. So I think that's kind of, it's not coincidental that you've come to this at the same time as the legislators in Europe have too. But one last point. And it's a bit of a biased point because Unwired is kind of very much focused on providing data to support these kind of journeys of continuous improvement. Where are the data gaps the biggest, and where, if you had a magic wand and could generate kind of insight and data and monitoring to really make this a rock solid, infrastructure, what would you prioritize? What data and insight or monitoring would you prioritize?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and again, it's one that I feel like being early on a Monday morning here in British Columbia, I feel like is going to dominate a lot of the rest of my week. So I'll sort of do a two-parter on this, Lee. Is we're really excited about being able to roll out through this platform this concept of an engagement score, which is something that we worked on with the multi-stakeholder committee to say how do you take self-assessment, how do you use self-assessment data to measure engagement, incredible engagement, right? And it's hard. Results are easy, it's how many yeses and how many nos. So we've worked pretty hard to really try and identify not the folks that are just showing the most yeses, because as soon as we start rewarding that, guess what? We're going to have a lot of yeses in the system, right? But in the folks that are really having a sober view of where they're at, are then leveraging the resources and the technical help that's available to them, both on platform and off platform, and then getting better. So I say that this engagement score, I would have said, used to be one of the big data gaps, right? Where we just didn't have a view of effort. We had a view of results, and because of that, we didn't really have much of a view at all, because results are actually really easy to game. But what makes that engagement and engagement score both higher and more rigorous, and this is where the data gap is being able to reach more workers from the perspective of how's this working on the farm in your experience, in your purview. We've got management sort of who think they've done these things, and they think they've done these things, and in many cases they have, but they think that by doing these things, having these policies, having these management systems, having these practices, whatever, that they're creating certain conditions that we would want to see and the workers would want to see. But we don't know that conclusively until we ask the workers of, is this management system effective at ensuring that reimbursement for all recruitment fees is done in a timely kind of way? We can measure the policy or the management system. We can measure efforts and steps that were taken to make that the best policy and management system possible. What we need more and more of is that worker validation, that it's having the results that we need from it. So I think we're in a situation again where our biggest data gap is that just true rigorous worker verification that all this work matters and is having the effect that we need it to be for the workers, for us, for the industry, for the buyers, for the consumers.
Brilliant. Kenton, that was a great kind of closing, I think. We've covered some distance from, looking at the failings of compliance or the kind of dead ends, to the need for collaboration, continuous improvement, to the need for systems that no longer kind of trigger acquiescence, but trigger more candid engagement with suppliers, which also unlocks our ability to support suppliers who need it most and to get the management systems they need to protect workers from recruitment fees, to finally recognizing that at the end of the day we're doing all of this to try and ensure that produce tastes good and it comes from healthy workplaces. And at the end of the day, the work is the only party in this landscape, the only stakeholder who can verify that at the end of the day. So, we don't generate data for its own sake. We need to continue to use whatever tools and platforms available to listen to the workers who are affected by recruitment fees, to check, if and when our, endless efforts are having the desired effect, when we're starting to dent the problem or get closer to a solution. So thank you. It's been a pleasure as always. I hope the coming week is full of receptive minds and open doors. But thanks again, Kenton, and have a great. Kenton's joining us from 9 hours, behind us in Vancouver. So thanks for making this a very early start.
Yeah, these are really rich conversations. I'm just so pleased that you're able to have the right conversations and get them out to folks. I always enjoy listening to the people that you bring on to the series. So thanks for the re-invite.
Pleasure.
That's it from us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to keep up to date with all things NYDA, and look out for our next installment. Goodbye.